I wanted to check out this Sky News interview with Zelensky. The full interview is something like 56 minutes. I recommend you go check it out. It's interesting to listen to the Ukrainian leader and his position shift as the war goes on, and listening to the insight that he can offer and trying to pick up on his mood and the temperament of Kiev from him. But we're not going to watch the full thing because it's 56 minutes and you only have so many hours in a day. So instead, I'm going to watch one section that I heard was particularly interesting and could be one of the first examples of Zelensky hinting about other compromise proposals that he might be willing to swallow temporarily for a ceasefire. Which in this interview, he is asked whether or not Ukraine would be willing to give up land, at least temporarily, in order to join NATO, so that the rest of the regions that are currently not, it doesn't have any Russian presence, could be protected by Article 5, and then the rest of Ukraine could be battled over diplomatically if, since like the military reality of it might not be possible, right? This was what was thrown at him. And he didn't say yes. He said that he hasn't been offered that, but he didn't shut it down. And this is the thing that interests me, and this is the main point we're going to be talking about here today, is that the Ukrainians, I believe, would be willing to compromise for a ceasefire. The problem is the word is compromise. And when you listen to Russian demands, it's give us all the land we control, also give us the city of Kherson that we're doing the human safarians, also give us the city of Zaporizhia. Also, you need to demobilize and demilitarize. Also, you cannot join any alliance, so you need to be disarmed, give up your land, and you need to have no alliance that could stop you from being invaded again. And that's well, somebody just said it, Odessa in chat. There'll be others that demand Odessa too, but Odessa has not been formally annexed, and so, I mean, I couldn't imagine. Could you imagine Trump giving up Odessa? No, I just don't want to daydream. Point is, when I hear compromise, it's you mean compromise as in concede, not okay, we concede this in order to get this. For example, give them back Kursk, get back Zaporizhia and Kherson regions. That would be a concession for concession, right? That's how negotiations kind of work. And so when we talk about negotiating, I want to make sure that we're talking about negotiating and not just a list of demands of how if the Ukrainians just submit a little bit harder, peace shall fall upon Europe and doves shall fly. Let's watch.
Breaking news. Volodymyr Zelensky has suggested...
I don't need to hear your interpretation of it. We can just listen to him.
Well, one alternative, perhaps, again, this is reported from the United States, and it's fairly simple, really, is that Ukraine joins NATO, but Russia takes control and keeps the land that it has to date. Would that be a possibility?
Ніхто не пропонував нам бути в НАТО.
No one has offered us to be in NATO with just one part or another part of Ukraine.
Закінчити гарячу стадію.
That's for once.
Факт.
The fact is that it is a solution to stop the hot stage of the war, because we can just give the NATO membership to the part of Ukraine that is under our control.
Факт. Можна було б, ніхто не пропонував.
Yes, it could be possible, but no one offered.
Треба робити.
But the invitation must be given to Ukraine within its internationally recognized border.
Ви не можете давати тільки частині.
You can't give invitation to just one part of a country. Why? Because thus you would recognize that Ukraine is only that territory of Ukraine and the other one is Russia.
Тому я і сказав, юридично ми не маємо права.
So legally, by law, we have no right to recognize the occupied territory as territory of Russia.
І тут не можна помилятись.
And here we must not make any mistake.
Зупинити гарячу стадію війни.
But if we want to stop the hot stage of the war,
зонтик, umbrella,
we should take under NATO umbrella the territory of Ukraine that we have under our control.
швидко. А далі
That's what we need to do fast. And then Ukraine can get back the other part of its territory diplomatically.
Ось що я сказав, що таку пропозицію
So, and this proposal has never been considered by Ukraine because no one has ever offered that to us officially.
не запропонував.
We can't, by law, recognize our territory, Ukrainian territory, under the occupation of Russia as Russian. That is impossible. That is against the constitution of Ukraine.
I understand completely.
To be clear, what he's saying is, in order for Ukraine to give up the territory that is internationally recognized as theirs, they would need to get their parliament to agree to change the constitution. It's not that Zelensky can just make the unilateral decision, okay, we're going to give up all of our land. Ukraine is a democracy, a flawed democracy, but a democracy. And the Rada, its parliament, would need to get enough votes, I believe an absolute majority, to agree to change the territorial boundaries of Ukraine in order to officially give up the claims to Crimea or any occupied lands. That is much more difficult than just convincing one administration. And should be kept into consideration that, you know, the Ukrainian people and their representatives will have a say at some point at the future of the country. And you cannot just, you know, Sykes-Picot agreement this and start like carving up Ukraine with you know, pencils and crayons, coloring in different sections, saying this will go to here and this will go to there, with no consideration of the effect it'll have for the locals who are very vocal.
Completely your position. It is interesting, though, because it seems to me you have moved to a point that if you could get your NATO membership, you would have accept that we could be moving into a ceasefire and potential talks, peace talks, and at some point in the future, you would consider diplomatically how to get your land back. That's quite a big step, because you're never going to accept that it's Russia's, but as you say, physically, they will hold it. But it could bring the war to a close.
A lot of different countries proposed a ceasefire. So the question is, ceasefire where? That is the question. The second point is, if we speak ceasefire, guarantees that Putin will not come back. Mm-hmm. And in this case, I commented you about NATO. Yes, NATO immediately the part of Ukraine. And we need it very much. Otherwise, he will come back. Otherwise, how we can go to ceasefire? Mm-hmm. So it's for us, it's very dangerous. That's what I meant.
So the general vibe I get from this is that they're willing to make some concessions and willing to, if they can get something out of it. Not conceding on the territory due to constitutional purposes, permanently saying this is all Russia forever, but willing to have a ceasefire if it means that there is a pathway through NATO membership and Article 5 inclusion that they don't get invaded again. So then they can try to find a way to get their land back, either diplomatically, through increasing pressure with sanctions or other tools in order to try to get their land back. Even if the odds of that happening without force are probably much slimmer than with force. But of course, that depends on like your ability to do it now. Either way, for me, this, again, like I said earlier, hits on the main sticking point when people talk about negotiate. When you say negotiate, what you mean is negotiate. And you need to know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away. You never count your blessings. By sitting at okay, the point is that if the Russians come there and they say, give us everything, fuck you, the Ukrainians need to be able to say, screw you too, we're walking away. And when Trump says, if the Russians, don't accept my deal, we're going to increase aid, he's going to actually have to do that. He's going to have to pull the trigger. Not only because it's an American defense priority and it's the right thing to do, keeping up American credibility, but also because, if he doesn't pull the trigger, that degrades his deterrence effect. That degrades the United States and Donald Trump's, quite frankly, and his administration's credibility. Once you make a threat like that and then you don't pull the trigger. Remember Obama's red line and how that ended up? It was a humiliation for the administration and the United States and hurt our credibility. People remember that. People still remember that. People remember this as the largest war in Europe for decades to come. It'll have ripple effects. And so when we say negotiate, that means you're trying to achieve things on your side. You're trying to achieve things. And it's not just the general idea of peace. It has to be a situation that can help, keep peace. It has to be a situation that's not just generally without guns firing, but also not on the front line, but also in occupied territories. There's not tons of executions and reprisals. There has to be something that is a just peace enough that they could live with, not something that is imposed on Ukrainians by the Russians that we jump onto because we just wanted to get on the first train out of this town and we didn't want to think about it all that much. Seems like it would end up with a North Korea/South Korea.
Bankrupt man.
Oh, well, you know, on the level of economic dilapidation, occupied Ukrainian territory has been degrading in its economic opportunities, and it's why a lot of young people have left for like a decade now. So if you want to talk about, I don't know, if you wait a few years and you look at, you know, free Ukraine from occupied Ukraine, you might be able to see it different with the satellites like you do with North Korea and South Korea. You know, the lights at nighttime? North Korea, South Korea lights. Speaking of North Korea, by the way, when we're on the topic, North Korea has given Russia more than 100 ballistic missiles and 5 million. Remember the European initiative was to get them 1 million shells? 5 million shells, according to the Ukrainian government. North Korea has supplied Russia with more than 100 short-range ballistic missiles and 5 million artillery shells, Ukrainian military intelligence said on November 29th. In comments to Interfax Ukraine, they also said Pyongyang has begun supplying Moscow with artillery systems last month. And in total, so not only are they giving them shells, they're now giving them the artillery guns themselves. And with Russia running out of artillery gun barrels, makes sense. Over 100 pieces of various equipment have been transferred, including 170 millimeter M1989 self-propelled artillery systems, 240 millimeter M1991 multiple rocket launchers. Additionally, North Korea continued to supply Russia with large caliber artillery ammunition and short-range ballistic missiles of the KN-2224 type. They also added that as of this month, over 5 million artillery rounds and 100 artillery shells have been delivered. I think they mean artillery systems. I think they miswrote this, the Kiev Independent. On the same day, the Russian Defense Minister Andriy Blesov arrived in Pyongyang for an official visit amid deepening military cooperation between the two countries. This gets reciprocated. 5 million shells is not a drop in the bucket. That very well could be the lion's share of Russia's artillery arsenal, which is absolutely necessary for the Russians to engage in any offensive operations anywhere. The entirety of their war and any successful offensive operation has always been buttressed by heavy artillery fire, and when they have the disproportionate advantage, they advance quicker and with less casualties, which is necessary for them to sustain this war. So to be clear, I think at this point, it would be hard to argue that the industrial contribution that North Korea is making, even if it's half of this, even if it's 2.5 instead of 5 million shells, is making much more of an impact than the 10,000 soldiers did in Kursk. And hopefully, the ATACMS response will stop the North Koreans from expanding those troop deployments, and maybe they will. But at the end of the day, the Russians need shells to advance. If they had 5 million less shells, I do not see them pushing on every front all at the same time. I could see them pushing on one front. I could even see them pushing on two fronts. But would they be pushing Kursk, Kryvyi, the Avdiivka front up here towards Pokrovsk, Chasiv Yar, towards the Oskil River around Kupiansk? The talk of increased bombardments on the south in Zaporizhia as Vasilov Novosilka is flanked. Would they be able to push on all these sides all at the same time and still have supplies to support Assad in Syria, who's facing new rebel offensives? I don't think so. So I think the main contribution North Korea has made up to this point, which could change in the future, has been industrial. Because if they're making up the majority of Russia's artillery arsenal at this point, I mean, they are giving them the fuel to fuel the war. I mean, the fuel to keep the war going. And without that fuel, they can't advance. Man, it's crazy. It's crazy numbers. hard to believe numbers. Now, of course, that is, I must emphasize that that is from the Ukrainian government. So, you know, it's not exactly like the least biased source in the world, but still, I mean, we do believe that that number is in the millions. So it's not impossible. It's certainly not impossible. Drip, drip, drip. Drip, drip, drip. The drip never stops. Drip feed, drip feed, drip feed. Drip feed, drip feed, drip feed. Okay.